Why don't we start off by getting your thoughts on the, Nabisco strike that Nando just did his segment on, and the possibility of the labor shortage in the United States leading to, some labor militancy, something that we desperately need.
Well, thanks a lot, Anna. Actually, I enjoyed very much the part that Nando was discussing. Actually, to tell you the truth, I really didn't even know there was a strike going on, but it was really very well covered and very well explained. Now, let me say at the very end what Nando mentioned, and I think it is really a basic issue, is that you have obviously two large groups of people. In the past, they were clearer than now. I will come to that in a minute. But you have people who actually have lots of ownership and capital, and obviously they are the owners of the companies. And as you said, it was not an accidental effect that actually, obviously, the owners of the companies try to extract as much as they can from workers. And then you have another very large group of people who actually don't have ownership, and they have to sell their labor. So this is, I think, the basic issue. The fact is that nowadays, however, you have more people than in the past who are somewhere in between, who actually might actually become capitalists because they have very high wages and then they save, and later, of course, they invest and they basically become, originally they might not have been part of this capitalist class, but they become the capitalist class, where in the past, really, it was harder to do that. So that was my first reflection. The second one is that you mentioned militancy. Again, I hope it's the case, but as your segment said itself, the difference now compared to the 1930s is the ability to shift production easily outside of the United States, which was not the case, 50 years ago.
Yeah. No, it's one of the central questions of our time is just there's sort of national identities. Workers feel more akin to their in their national identities, but companies have no loyalty at all, so they can move easily. Not beyond loyalty, they have the actual technical capacity to do it through increased shipping lanes. This is the reality that we live in, and I think that one of the things that has emerged post 2008 is this feeling that there's been a kind of loss of belief in the system, in capitalism, neoliberalism, whatever, that people don't buy into it as much as they did, say, in the 1990s. Yet it endures, and it seems in a way stronger than ever, despite a sort of loss of faith in it. And in your book title, Capitalism Alone, seems to me to indicate that capitalism is the only mode of production in the world right now. There is no Soviet Union. There is no alternative, threatening it. What accounts for capitalism's ability to defend itself or to perpetuate itself, despite what seems like a series of crises that would have threatened it, and a sort of loss of faith in it?
Well, first, actually, I agree with what you said, that particularly among young people, and this is not something that is my opinion simply because if you look at the surveys, of course, the confidence that they have in capitalism has declined. And I think it has declined because of the financial crisis. I think to some extent it might have also declined because of the current crisis that we are living through. And the realization, as you said before, that, of course, capitalist companies are not really... In reality, they are not American companies. They can be companies anywhere in the world. Even Adam Smith mentioned that actually, the capital owner is basically a person who can move his capital wherever he wants, and he's not really beholden to a given country necessarily. Workers are different because obviously they have to live here. They have actually friends and family. They cannot just simply take off. Now, when you mentioned the title of the book, yes, the title of the book essentially means that this is the only mode of production existing now. That does not mean that historically things cannot change. After all, we have had different capitalisms, and we do have different capitalisms right now. Of course, one of the objectives of the book is also to situate China as a capitalist country, and I will not go into that, why I believe there. Like if you look at the objective criteria, China is indeed a capitalist country. But you have differences between different types of capitalism. Capitalism in Germany is not the same as in the US. In the US, it's not the same in Mexico. Mexico is different from China. So we do have a variety. So I don't think that actually accepting the fact that capitalism is the only game in town, it means essentially that you can do nothing.
Okay, so I actually do want you to elaborate on that a little more, because I think it's a fascinating point. So, you write about, liberal meritocratic capitalism that's embodied in the United States, and then political capitalism. Can you talk about the differences and how they compete with one another? What are they competing for?
There, of course, Anna, it's a good point. Is that in my whole chapter I spend it on China. And the reason, without going into too many details, but the reasons I argue that China is capitalist is that you have most of the production done with, capitalist sector. In other words, like in this country, you have most of the production done on privately owned means of production. You hire labor force that are workers. And in that sense, China is not very much different. However, politically, it is different. And we see it today. And I don't want to say that, of course, I predicted that 2 years ago when I did a book, but we see today ability of Chinese government to actually crack down when it wants to on some very large private sector companies, as the case of Ant and Alibaba and Tencent more recently, have been developments that might happen in the US with anti-monopoly different legal suits that are now going on, but it will simply take much longer here than there. So in that sense, you see the power of the state in China being much greater, despite the fact that it's a capitalist country.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that, and you've written about that on your Substack. These crackdowns from the Chinese state on some of their tech sector, and I was kind of interested in how it was covered here in the United States, and how China generally is covered in the United States, especially in recent years. As I think a lot of people in the American elite sphere are very freaked out by the fact that China is going to surpass the United States in GDP very soon. Can you talk about those reforms and why the Chinese state does it, and why the U.S. finds them so repellent?
Nando, what I find interesting in this particular case recently with China is that you have a slightly kind of a schizophrenic approach here. Everybody has been talking for a long time that China's inequality is extremely high. Actually, if you look at the numbers, China's inequality is higher than inequality in the US. Part of that is because there are really huge poverty pockets which exist in the rural areas. Nevertheless, the difference between Shanghai and, Western China is enormous. So the inequality is a really big issue in China. Now, in these recent moves, which I actually see as twofold moves, and this is not my original view, but the first one is to crack down at these high-tech companies, in other words, to show them they cannot be monopolists and they cannot be more important than the state. And secondly, to try to achieve what they call common prosperity. So why I feel this schizophrenic attitude? Because people, by focusing on Chinese inequality, were rightly criticizing that inequality. But what I think the government in China is doing now is actually trying to control that inequality or to reduce it. And in that sense, I see that as a positive development. However, the same people who regret or sort of deplore inequality then are now criticizing these moves. So I think in that sense, it is a little bit schizophrenic. You actually have to decide if you really believe that inequality should be reduced, or if you really just say that from time to time when you have a Davos meeting, and then when there is a crackdown on Tencent or Alibaba, then you complain about it.
That reminds me of what some of the defenders of capitalism use as an argument here in the United States in order to maintain the system. And, one person who comes to mind is Senator Elizabeth Warren, for instance, who essentially argues that, the problem isn't capitalism itself. She identifies as a capitalist, but the real problem is the crony capitalism. It's the corruption that's allowed to take place in America. That's really what takes this wonderful system and taints it. But I think, you do a good job in helping people understand that it's not really the bug, it's the feature. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I agree. And actually, you said that before when you discussed the strikes and the fact that you said it yourself, like it is a feature because, that contrast or conflict between labor and capital is not something which is, a bug. It is not, the issue of corruption is a separate issue, and I'll come to that in a minute. But the feature of the system is you have a given pie, and that pie has to be divided between labor and capital. And we know that pie, the share, which belongs to capital owners rather, in the United States has been rising in the last 30 years. So we know that this is actually, in papers, it's a fact. And that feature has been in the system since the beginning of the system. As I said before, doesn't mean that the pie, which belongs to labor, is fixed. It could a part of the pie that is not fixed. It can be increased, and labor militancy is one of the ways of doing it. Now, when it comes to corruption, it's very easy to be against corruption because practically nobody is going to say that they're in favor of corruption. But, you have accumulation of enormous wealth, which we have seen now even during the crises, many good examples. And while it is not corruption per se, the political power which is owned by these people is enormous. And in that sense, they might not have, made that money illegally. Certainly, in most cases, they have not. But it really gives them a political power with which they can actually affect the system, whether through political process, lobbying, control of the media. We know, for example, lots of media which is owned by very rich people, including the richest person in the world owning probably the second most influential newspaper in the United States. So this is the power, which is really not corruption per se, but it's really very much related to the wealth.
If you enjoyed this clip from Jacobin Weekends, please hit like and subscribe. You can also watch the full episode or catch any future live stream by clicking the join button below and becoming a Jacobin YouTube member. Thank you.